Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are moving on to Volume 8 of the 10-volume series of the Journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and within Volume 8 we are beginning with the journal collection number 40. And with that said, of course, it opens with a couple of editorial biographical sort of updates, and I always read those. And by the way, the year is 1849. Emerson will be 46 in May of that year. So with that said, I'll go ahead and get started. The opening year found Mr. Emerson at his normal winter task of lecturing, but refreshed by his visit to England, Scotland, and France, and the meeting with interesting men and women. Also, he had the sure pleasure found in coming back to his family and near friends and in bearing his part as an American. In this excursion he had found also what he sought, quote, a whip for his top, end quote. New experiences were to be digested to find their place in his work. He gave a course in Boston and lectures in Roxbury, Cambridge, Worcester, Gloucester, Framingham, Northampton, Providence, Portland, and smaller towns. Mr. Alcott had moved to Boston and did not return to Concord for 9 years. End of note. January 1849. The word God is the algebraic X in morals, and the Hebrews with right philosophy made it unspeakable. But the stupid world, finding a word, assumes this scientific for a baptismal name, and talks of him as easily as of Captain Gulliver. Circumstance. Napoleon said, quote, view man as we may, he is as much the result of his physical and moral atmosphere as his own organization, end quote. Quetelet. Perhaps one of the most real advantages of railroads, and now of California, to the people of New England will be the knowledge of geography which they diffuse. If a man is going to California, he announces it with some hesitation, because it is a confession that he has failed at home. Yet you tell me they are hospitable in Germany. Yes, but I do not travel to find hospitable people. If I knew of any magnet that would point to that quarter where are the people whom I wish to see, I would sell all to buy it and to travel in the direction it indicated, though to Samarcand and Timbuktu. From a Treatise of Humane Learning. Music instructs me, which be lyric moods. Let her instruct me rather how to show no weeping voice for loss of fortune's goods. Geometry gives measure to the earth below. Rather let her instruct me how to measure what is enough for need, what fit for pleasure. She teacheth how to lose naught in my bounds, and I would learn with joy to lose them all. The artist shows which way to measure rounds, but I would know how first man's mind did fall, how great it was, how little now it is, and what that knowledge was which wrought us this. Fulk Greville, Lord Brooke. Since to be reverenced, loved, obeyed, and known, man must affect with powers above his own. Lord Brooke, Fame and Honor. All do what the world admires comes from within, a doom whereby the sin condemns the sin. Lord Brooke, Fame and Honor. I saw on Saturday at Ward's the Ludovisi Juno, which is again one of the miracles of old sculpture, and indeed of human art, as unaccountable as Shakespeare's drama. There was never that face or figure in nature from which it could be modeled. I am sure that the artist drew from a cloud when he molded these features. Then the Jove's head was a combed mountain. Here follows two Latin inscriptions, and both of these do have translations, so I will read them. The first one states, "This human age is not an age." And the second one, attributed to Ali bin Abu Talib, says, "Among mankind I have noted 3 obvious and evident conditions. The man who finds this life narrow, but followed by another glorious one. The man who finds this life excellent, but after it no other will follow. the man who, wasting both, may have life neither here nor hereafter. Spirit of the age. Now that the man was ready, the horse was brought. The timeliness of this invention of the locomotive must be conceded. To us Americans it seems to have fallen as a political aid. We could not else have had the vast North America together, which now we engage to do. It was strange, too, that when it was time to build a road across to the Pacific, a railroad, a ship road, a telegraph, and in short, a perfect communication in every manner for all nations, 'twas strange to see how it is secured. The good world soul understands us well. How simple the means. Suddenly the Californian soil is spangled with a little gold dust here and there in a mill race in a mountain cleft. An Indian picks up a little, a farmer and a hunter and a soldier each a little. The news flies here and there, to New York, to Maine, to London, and an army of 100,000 picked volunteers, the ablest and keenest and boldest that could be collected, instantly organize and embark for this desert, bringing tools, instruments, books, and framed houses with them. Such a well-appointed colony as never was planted before arrive with the speed of sail and steam on these remote shores, bringing with them the necessity that the government shall instantly proceed to make the road which they themselves are all intimately engaged to assist. It was strange, too, that all over the world about the same moment mineral treasures were uncovered. We heard of gold in various parts of the United States, in Siberia, in Africa, on the Lomit River, and in other parts of Europe. Silver, quicksilver, platina, copper, lead, iron, and coal all appeared in new quarters about the same time, in other words, in the year 1848. Contradictions. We remember that we forget. Our freedom is necessary. The preacher of eternity dates our chronology. March 19th. Gravitation is the operator in what we call mechanical division. Gravitation is nature's grand vizier and prime favorite. Much that we call chemical, even electrical action, is really at last his deed. Look at the sponge-like fallacious forms which wet sand and clay take when falling with the water, in spring on the steep sides of the quote-unquote the deep cut. In the railroad, and one will suspect that gravity, too, can make a leaf. In morals, again, gravity is the laissez-faire principle or destiny or optimism than which nothing is wiser or stronger. That nature works after the same method as the human imagination. That nature makes flowers as the mind makes images. That metaphysics might anticipate Jussieu. That organic matter and mind, got from the same law, so correspond. Our science is very shiftless and morbidly wise, wise when it is not wanted, blind where we most wish to see. What a pother in the last 20 years about geology. Geology were crossing all seas and lands like so many squibs. Well, why did they not find California? They all knew what all men most wanted. Why did not they find the copper mines? There is no Columbus in these sciences with an anticipating mind. But they are like critics and amateurs. When the heel of a trapper's foot has turned up gold or copper or quicksilver, they come and give it a name. March 24th. The Indians were a sort of money, it seems, in Spanish colonies, and the poor Lucayans were treated according to the proverb, quote, "The kid was seethed in its mother's milk," end quote. Columbus seems to have been the principal introducer of American slavery. See Helps's History of the Conquerors of America and Their Bondsmen. Town and Country Club. At Alcott's last Tuesday, March 20th, we had a meeting of 30 men and discussed the expediency of a club and clubroom. Alcott was festal and Olympian as always when friends come. His heart is then too great. His voice falters and chokes in his throat. Every newcomer seems large, sacred, and crowned to him. It was proposed that the club should rent the room in which we sat, Alcott's, and that he should be declared perpetual secretary. It is much wanted by the country scholars, a cafe or reading room in the city, where for a moderate subscription they can find a place to sit in and find their friends when in town, and to write a letter in or read a paper. Better still, if you can add certain days of meeting when important questions can be debated, communications read, etc., etc. It was proposed by Hale and others some time since to form in Boston a quote unquote graduates club. This would be that. Then the ministers have a quote hook and ladder or a railroad club, end quote. Enthusiasm is a fine thing, my son, so it be guided by prudence, says the grocer, which is like Ellery Channing's saying of C. Yes, he would draw very well if he had any talent for it. April 1st. Imbecility and energy. The key to the age is this thing and that thing. England. The striking difference between English and our gentlemen is their thorough drill. They are all Etonians, they know prosody, and tread securely through all the humanities. The university is felt. It needs that our people should have closer association, as scholars, that they may have their grammar, gazetteer, and dividend not so dusty and cobswebbed, and I wish our club to be dignified with literary exercises. May 3rd. I set out in the Warren lot a couple of pears, seedlings from my Bartlett, which I budded myself. The best had died in the heater piece, and these two poor old-looking young things remained. Let us see if they can thrive. Teschemacher rejected the suggestion of a quickness or scientific genius as being any substitute for constant industry in analysis and experiment. Marshall gave me to think of the faculty of writers. He can detach the object with unerring taste, and knows he can. Sees that the power perfect in him differs infinitely from the imperfect approaches to the same power in ordinary scribblers. It is a chemical mixture, and not mechanical, which makes the writer. The others have not intelligence enough to know that they are not writers. One thing more, Marshall suggests again, as every purely literary book does, the immortality. We see we are wiser than we were. We are older. Can nature afford to lose such improvements? Is nature a suicide? Macaulay. The historian of England or France seems to be compelled to treat of England as of an Englishman. The nation has a continuous existence, memory, history in his head, knows his rights. Who buys Channing's house buys a sunset. It should be sold in a fair day, then the purchaser gets rivers, mountains, villages in the bargain. I would not, if I owned that place, sell it. I would hold on to it as long as I could see. I meet in the street people full of life. I am of course at ebb tide, they at flood. They seem to have come from the south, or from the west, or from Europe. I see them pass with envy at this gift which includes all gifts. Valor pays rents as surely as land. Up, heart, and dispose of the day's duty first, and the dividend of peace and power will be paid. The proverb of business before friends is God's truth too. The way to wealth of every kind is plainly along the upper road, and not by State Street. Convert yourself into wealth, and you shall buy kings. Sordid calculations convert you into punk and abhorrence. The doctrine that genius takes its rise out of the mountains of rectitude, that all beauty and power which men covet are born out of that humility egg which they disdain, is alternately conceded and suggested. How we love nobility, priest, poet, republican cannot keep his eyes off of it. Yet how rare. The whole society and every member of it is first or last adjudged to be snobbish. Why? Because every member is referring or looking up to others, who in their turn are referring, and only 1 in 10,000 is a person of elevated sentiments whose condition flows from his character, secure, serene, and his own friend. From a better man than myself, I used to say, I can easily expect a finer thought. From a worse, I am incredulous. But that better we so slowly believe. Plato suggested, after Pythagoras, thorough culture. 'Tis pity our dismasted, rudderless hulks drifting about on the sea of life should not be taken into port. Pity that the Commonwealth should not set its Horace Manns on applying the stern culture suggested in the Republic to the adults, and so keep them up. When the school and college dropped them, let Plato take them up, and life would no longer be forlorn, and they left to the stock quotations by day and cards by night. I was about to add just now, in speaking of morals as the foundation of nobility, that we do with what as our farmers, who carry all their best peaches and apples to market, and feed their families with the refuse. We parade our nobilities in poems, instead of working them up into happiness. Then we must bring the day about with draught and prose. Feats. He wrote a fair hand, and he could draw the same lines and capitals with his skates on the ice. Giotto, the painter, could draw with his pen a perfect circle. And there follows a Italian sentence which has no translation. Mr. Sylvester told me that Ferry, the engineer, could draw a model of any loom or machine after once seeing it. He went through Mr. Strutt's mills and drew from memory designs of the machinery, which were printed in Rees' Cyclopedia to the great indignation of Mr. Strutt. Swedenborg. I look on Swedenborg as on Kant, Newton, Leibniz, Goethe, Humboldt, men of larger stature than others, and possessing very great advantages, in that preternatural size. He and Newton were both cracked or bursten, yet 'tis easier to see the reflection of the sphere in globes of this magnitude, cracked or not, than in the common minute globe. One must study Quetelet to know the limits of human freedom. In 20,000 population, just so many men will marry their grandmothers. Clow's beautiful poem I read again last in the sitting room. 'Tis a kind of new and better Carlyle. The Homeric iteration is one secret, the truly modern question and modern treatment another, and there is abundance of life and experience in it. Good passages are the prayer to the sun and moon and hours to pass slowly over Philip and Elspie, and good youth in it, as Elizabeth Hoare says. The wisdom of words every day might surprise us. After a man has made great progress and has come, as he fancies, to heights hitherto unscaled, the common words still fit his thought. Nay, he only now finds for the first time how wise they were. Macrocosm, reason, conscience, substance, accidents, nature, relation, fortune, fate, genius, element, person. 'Twill be long before he needs a new coat. The old mythology still serves us, not of Jove, Mars, etc., but of nature, destiny, fortune. Words therefore seem wiser than any man, and to be tools provided by the genius of humanity. After the student has wasted all night speculating on his analogies and ties to the world and to the starry heaven, the first word he meets in the morning book are microcosm, macrocosm. Realism. Do it. Bridge the gulf well and truly from the edge to edge, and the dunces will find it out. There is but one verdict needful, and that is mine. If I do it, I shall know it. Happy is he who finishes his work for its own sake, and the state in the world is happy that has the most of such finishers. The world will do justice to such. It cannot otherwise, but never on the day when the work is newly done and presented. Every man settles his own rate. Realism. One would think, from the talk of men, that riches and poverty were a great matter, whilst they are really a thin costume, and our life, the life of all of us, is identical. For we transcend circumstance continually, and taste the real quality of existence, as in our employments, which only differ in the manipulation, but express the same laws, or in our thoughts, which wear no broadcloth and taste no ice creams. We see God face to face every hour, and know the savor of nature. Days. There is the least deliberation in our life. We worry through the world and do not unfold ourselves with leisure and dignity and adorn our day suitably. Especially I observe that we have not learned the art to avail ourselves of the virtues and powers of our companions. The day is gloomy with politics or bitter with debt. Common sense is the wick of the candle. Intellect. Descartes, being asked where was his library, showed a calf which he was dissecting and said, "This is my library." We may well ask, what is the effect of thoughts? Hafitz very properly inquires, quote, "Why changes not the inner mind violet earth into musk?" Quote, "Dürer's pencil, which first knew the law of faces, and then faces drew." Reason of the aversation from metaphysics is the voice of nature. Nature made the eye to see other things, but not itself. If you have sharp eyes, use them, not brag of them. Beauty. Quote, "Things that are natural are never without a certain grace and excellence. The cracks and rents of a well-baked loaf induce a desire to partake of it. So likewise the cleft fig, the luscious olive, the spiked grain," etc. Marcus Antoninus. Those who painted angels and nativities and descents from the cross were also writing biographies and satires, though they knew it not. The history of humanity is no hopping squib, but all its discoveries in science, religion, and art consecutive and correlated. Quote, "I'd rather go a-fishing," said the chimney sweep at Marblehead, when it was proposed to abate his price a little, and enrage the whole town. Immortality. I notice that as soon as writers broach this question, they begin to quote. I hate quotations. Tell me what you know. May 22nd. 2 gravestones have been planted in my path within the year, Ellen Hooper's and David Scott's. Ellen Hooper connected herself with all the noblest and most loved figures that have cheered and enriched me in my own land, or with all but one, my own Ellen she never knew, and she gave a value by her interest in all my writings. Words. The collegians have seldom made a better word than squirt for a showy sentence, so I find tin for money always comic. Honey pie, says State Street, when there is flattery. All my eye, when any exaggeration. In conversation, the game is to say something new with old words, and you shall observe a man of the people picking his way along, step by step, using every time an old boulder, yet never setting his foot on an old place. Wilkinson, Swedenborg's pupil, after 100 years a philosopher-critic with a brain like Bacon. Why not read in England? Are there no mornings in England? Do they read Dickens when they first get up, as well as overnight? Swedenborgian church and imprisonment in the letter. Never a hero stirs out of it. Ah, the imagination has a flute that gets the atoms of our frame in a dance like planets, and once so flagellated, the whole man reeling drunk to the music, they never quite subside to their old marble. Can't forgive Swedenborg the confusion of planes. We will pardon a popular orator for a mistake in categories, but not a categorist, not Aristotle, Kant, or Swedenborg. Has not the intellect sins? He shall be degraded out of Olympus for 1,000 years, and shall not eat ambrosia for that term. Let him be tried by the law of his tribe, high crime and misdemeanor. Swedenborg was the last Christian. Nearness. Really, the soul is near things, because it is the center of the universe, so that astronomy and nature and theology date from where the observer stands. There is no quality in nature's vast magazines he cannot touch, no truth in science he cannot see, no act in will he cannot verify, there where he stands. I conceive the value of railroads to be this, in education, namely, to unite the advantages of town and country life, neither of which we can spare. A great deal that is not set down in the bill. I pay the schoolmaster, but 'tis the schoolboys that educate my son. The children divide their waking time between school, fruit, and the cats. I like to see them learn the use of cats. Then 'tis worthwhile to suffer a dog in the house a little. And after, be sure, let them learn the use of horses. The tree needs water and digging about and pruning and protection from its enemies, the slug, the louse, the borer, and so on. More than all, it needs food. It will die without food. If you want fruit, you must give manure. Well, then, a pretty case you make out for the cultivator. Well, it is not gainful, and yet it seems to me much that I have brought a skilful chemist into my ground, and keep him there overnight, all day, all summer, for an art that can take common water and clod, and by means of sunshine, manufacture the handsomest and most delicious Louisa Bon de Jerseys, Bartlett's, Bergamos, and brown berries, an inimitable manner which no confectioner can approach, and his method of working is no less beautiful than his result. In the drought, the pear tree roots murmured in the dark, and said they were sorely put to it for the water, and could not go on another day, supplying food to the tree above them. But there is the kind old master who so tended us, and visits the tree daily. We hear his footsteps every morn. If we could only give him a sign of our condition. Be it so. I will instantly, said the taproot, hang him out a signal on the highest bough of the tree, and we will see if he can understand us. So the taproot ceased working, and the top bough, wanting food, drooped and hung its head. The master, you may be sure, was not long in seeing the withering of his favorite, and, much alarmed, he ran in haste and brought a water pot, and soon after a barrel of water, and abundantly refreshed the roots, which thus restored showed their good humor to the very top of the tree. Quote, Your pears, which you raise, cost you more than mine, which I buy. Yes, they are costly, but we all have expensive vices. You play at billiards, and I at pear trees. Who climbs best? The monkey? No. The squirrel goes higher. No, sap climbs better, and will go into the top bough, and to that last vein and edge of the highest leaf on the tree. Yes, but a drop of water climbs higher, for look, there is a cloud above the tree. Well, heat climbs higher than water, and space higher than heat. Riches. Neither will poverty suit every complexion. Socrates and Franklin may well go hungry and in plain clothes if they like, but they are people who cannot afford this, but whose poverty of nature needs wealth of food and clothes to make them decent. Martial is the literature of aristocracy. See the famous epigram, De Porcena et Muccio Scaevola, Lib. 1, 22. And now read this, De Portia Uxor Bruti. And then there's an untranslated section from Martial, and then another quotation below it. And then I'll just continue to read as if I had read it in English. Says this ancient Herrick in the ode Ad Avitum, and all the English lyricists are much indebted to him. Herrick chiefly. Here is the original Dr. Fell. And then there is another untranslated section. Martial, like Aesop or Horace or Homer or a Bible, shows that one book can avail to touch all the points in the circle of daily manners and furnish a popular literature as well as 100. Editor's note. Here follow many references to the odes of Martial, ending with this line in which Mr. Emerson delighted as showing the elegance of self-service his own practice. End note. Followed by another untranslated Latin inscription. Quote, The wisdom and the arts of Athens form in all polished communities a principal object of study, and to comprehend and to enjoy them is to be a gentleman. End quote. St. John. June 20th. At our sad fire last night at the old courthouse and the store on the east side, which burned the courthouse, James Connor found a door among the chattels of one family, and carrying off that prize, he and Sam Staples protecting their backs by means of it from the scorching heat, whilst they directed the engine pipe against the 10-footer under the elm tree. I had not seen a door perform such good extra service since its famed heat of the coverlet. At New York, June 13th, 14th, 15th. I read St. Anthony's sermon to the fishes, full of bonhomie in the idea and the expletives, but ludicrously inapt in some of the points, e.g., reminding them how much our Lord loved to eat them, but kindly considered in reminding them how safe they were from rain, wind, dust, and deluges, not afraid of crevices. He should have reminded them for their new duties. They have the vacation we men sigh for, suggested a piscine philosophy in view of Pike and Grampus, and not failed to throw in an effective hint of transmigration and assent to the inconveniences of pantaloons and Westminster Catechism one of these days. In New York, I saw Catherine Sedgwick, daughter of Roderick Sedgwick, also Henry James. Quote, "For philosophy, O Socrates, is an elegant thing if any one moderately meddles with it, but if he is conversant with it more than is becoming, it corrupts the man," said Callicles, Taylor's Plato. I think it is a consideration of some importance that the federal union takes away from its members the power of declaring peace and war, so that let Texas and California and Minnesota and Oregon be never so quarrelsome, once in the union their hands are tied. July 1st. I find England again this summer and Macaulay's 2 volumes as I found it last summer in London. The same country of wealth, of birth, of precedent, of decorum. The story is told with all that ability which one meets so abundantly in England and in no other country, full of knowledge of books and men and customs which it is creditable to know. The story is quite full of bon ton. It is written with extreme diligence, and it is very entertaining and valuable from the amount of good information and curious anecdote, and really has claims to be a history of the people of England, as the author has studied to make it. The second volume is far the best. The character of James is so dramatically bad, and the character and conduct of William so excellent. At last, in the success of William, tears almost come to the eyes. The persons and incidents are so fine that it seems strange this period has been neglected so long. One sad reflection arises on all the course of the narrative of wonder, namely, at the depravity of men in power, and at the shocking tameness with which it is endured. One would think the nation was all tailors and mince-pie makers. The writer has a great deal of talent, but no elevation of mind. There is not a novel or a striking thought in the book, not a new point of view from which to consider the events, and never one thrill or pulse of the moral energy imparted. He is always a fine, artificial Englishman, and keeping the highway invariably, well bred but for sale, all dated Windsor Castle. Here is good black blood, English pluck, but no philosophy. A deal of pamphlets, now well bound. I cannot get enough alone to write a letter to a friend. Bragg. The feeling of Boston and Massachusetts for a few years past has been like that of the shopmen and of a village on the morning of a cattle show or other holiday, which is to bring a crowd of strangers into the town. Everybody is building booths or arranging shop windows or laying tables. Everywhere a small pan to gather some rill of the expected silver shower. So fuss Boston and Massachusetts on the eve of a prodigious prosperity, and we build and plant and lay roads and set up signposts to attract our share of the general blessing. In New York they characterize our hats and books and beauties as frog-pondish, but we, on the other hand, pity the whole uncotuitated creation. The Kentuckian said that his country was, quote, bounded on the east by the rising sun, on the north by the aurora borealis, on the west by the processions of the equinoxes, and on the south by the day of judgment. End quote. Mountain air better than gas or tobacco. July 13th. Yesterday, the day before, and today, another storm of heat like that 3 weeks ago. The day is dangerous, the sun acts like a burning glass on the naked skin, and the very slugs on the pear leaves seem broiled in their own fat. Mercury 94 degrees at 3 p.m. When a man dies in Concord, the neighbors sum up his epitaph, quote, "He was a good provider," end quote, or a bad. I took my hoe and water pail and fell upon my sleepy pear trees, broke up the soil, pulled out the weeds and grass. I manured and mellowed and watered, pruned and washed and staked and separated the clinging boughs by shingles covered with list. I killed every slug on every leaf. The detestable pear worm, which mimics a twig, I detected and killed. The poor tree, tormented by this excessive attention and industry, must do something and began to grow. My pears and apples were well favored, as long as I did not go beyond my own hedge. But if I went down to Edmund Hosmer's farm, his trees were 3 stories high, and high up in the air hung a harvest of fruit. Calvinism. 'Tis curious that Swedenborg should be entangled with Calvinism. 'Tis curious that all the great mathematicians, be they never so grand, should be unable to pass the materialism barrier. Newton is rusty with Calvinism. Cuvier is Calvinistic. All the science of England and France is, all but Goethe and Oken. Plato and Kepler only have united geometry to the poetic spirit. What to do with the stupendous old prig? And Dante pleases the friendly conversation with Brunetto Latino, Inferno 1582. And then there is a portion from it which is translated. In my memory is fixed, and now comes to my heart the dear, kind, paternal image of you when in the world, hour by hour, you taught me how man makes himself eternal. I think if I were a professor of rhetoric, teacher of the art of writing well to young men, I should use Dante for my textbook. Come hither, youth, and learn how the brook that flows at the bottom of your garden, or the farmer who plows the adjacent field, your father and mother, your debts and credits, and your web of habits are the very best basis of poetry, and the material which you must work up. Dante knew how to throw the weight of his body into each act, and is, like Byron, Burke, and Carlyle, the rhetorician. I find him full of the noble vulgare eloquenza, that he knows, quote, God damn, end quote, and can be rowdy if he pleases, and he does please. Yet is not Dante reason or illumination, and that essence we were looking for, but only a new exhibition of the possibilities of genius. Here is an imagination that rivals in closeness and precision the senses, but we must prize him as we do a rainbow. We can appropriate nothing of him. Could we some day admit into our oyster heads the immense figure which these flagrant points compose when united, the hands of Phidias, the conclusion of Newton, the pantheism of Goethe, the all-wise music of Shakespeare, the robust eyes of Swedenborg? I think Hindu books excellent gymnastic for the mind as showing treatment. Passion is logical, and I note that the vine symbol of the Bacchus which intoxicates the world is the most geometrical and tractable of all plants. The Times. The cheap press and the universal reading which have come in together have caused a great many translations to be made from the Greek, the German, the Italian, and the French. Bond's library now furnishes me with a new and portable Plato, as it had already done with new Goethe's, and John Carlyle translates Dante. To me, the command is loud to use the time by reading these books, and I should as soon think of foregoing the railroad and the telegraph as to neglect these. With these belong the medieval chronicles, Richard of Devizes, Asser's Life of Alfred, and the rest in Bonn. A feature of the times is that when I was born, private and family prayer was in the use of all well-bred people, and now it is not known. Another feature of the age is the paramount place of natural history. Men in Nature. Some persons have such determination or tendency that if by any heat their particles could be set free, so as to obey it, they would at once assume the forked or horned or clubbed or scaly forms which they now suggest. August. Correcting manuscripts and proofs for printing makes apparent the value of perspective as essential to good writing. Once we said genius was health, but now we say genius is time. This doctrine of results, too, from which flows genius, also appears to be geometrical and mechanical, or that gravitation reaches up into the sacred soul. On the Rhine, Dr. Polidori said to Byron, quote, "After all, what is there you can do that I cannot?" Quote, "Why, since you force me to say," answered the other, "I think there are 3 things I can do which you cannot." Polidori defied him to name them. "I can," said Lord Byron, "swim across that river, I can snuff out that candle with a pistol shot at the distance of 20 paces, and I have written a poem of which 14,000 copies were sold in one day." Moore's Life of Byron. Mr. Harrison Gray Otis said, that it was of no use to tie up a woman's property. By kissing or kicking her husband would get it away from her. The loves of flint and iron are naturally a little rougher than those of the nightingale and the rose. There is no remedy for the musty, self-conceited English life made up of fictions, hating ideas like Orientalism, that astonishes and disconcerts English decorum. For once there is the thunder he never heard, light he never saw, and power which trifles with time and space. This is the end of Part 1 of Emerson's Journal Collection number 40, dating from the year 1849, when the writer was 46 years old. Thank you for listening.